The imposter phenomenon is essentially feelings of intellectual fraudulence or feeling like a fake. Individuals who have internalized feelings that somehow they are fooling people, that they are really just a intellectual fake, that no matter how accomplished they appear to be, that deep down inside they really are not as competent as they come across or as their accomplishments would suggest. There hasn't been a formal sort of establishment of a relationship between imposterism and self-efficacy, but if I can just sort of think it through sort of conceptually, I think that it certainly would be. So in other words, people who are feeling like an imposter are more than likely going to have lower self-efficacy. Self-efficacy, of course, coming from Albert Bandura, feeling like you have the capacity to do things, to accomplish things. But when you feel like an imposter, even though you've demonstrated the ability to do things, you still have internalized this belief that you are fooling people. Right. And so imposterism will likely be linked to sort of lower feelings of self-efficacy. One of the reasons why I became very interested in studying the imposter phenomenon was because when I looked through the psychological literature, which again dates back to the 70s, I found that there really had not been a lot of work done that focused on ethnic minorities. When the studies initially came out, they focused primarily on women and disproportionately white women who were professionals, who were very successful. And when I came across the literature, I was fascinated by it. My own research focuses on ethnic minority students, African American students in particular. And so reading about it, I found myself fascinated by it. And I thought to myself, wow, this could really apply to the work that I do. In fact, it could apply to my own experience as an African American man. And so that's why I became interested in looking at imposterism amongst ethnic minority students. And so that's a sort of a nice segue. And so your question regarding ethnic minority professionals in white settings, I think it's very salient, because when you find yourself working in settings where you are a distinct numerical minority, you likely are going to feel, out of place, maybe not as accepted. Certainly socially, you might feel like there's a disconnect, and you probably feel the need to prove yourself. And certainly the need to prove yourself. I mean, that's not something that is necessarily unique to the experiences of ethnic minorities. I think perhaps all people feel that way, but I think that for racial and ethnic minorities, it becomes heightened when you are one of only a handful, or in some instances the only person of color working in a predominantly white setting. And so that's what distinguishes that experience from someone white who might also feel like an imposter, because it's not typically based on feeling like a racial minority. Well, I think that there are probably quite a few, and depending on what your social identity or identities, would be. So again, let's start with women, because we know that's where the literature started with this idea. And if you are, a woman, let's say working in STEM related fields, uh, feeling like an imposter, even though you have demonstrated the ability that you are a strong, sort of math student, science student, technology student, whatever, and you've done well. But when you're in a classroom, or when you're in a work environment with mostly men, um, and you are reminded that you are not a man, and all the various ways that men, tend to do that, both subtly and not so subtly. That would be one example of how a microaggression based on your gender could impact your feelings of imposterism. Similarly, as a racial and ethnic minority, working in an environment where you are, one of only a handful. My students used to tease me. My students of color would, refer to me as the only lonely. Because I was oftentimes the only African American professor that they would have experienced. And so when you are sort of in situations where you are the only lonely, or one of only a handful, and you have to sort of contend with some of the microaggressions that can be, unintentionally, oftentimes, sort of communicated to you. The way that we can support our peers is by validating, one, their accomplishments. Part of what happens with people who are suffering from imposterism is that they don't take the time to acknowledge the good things that they have done or have accomplished. And perhaps other people, are witnessing this, but aren't communicating, hey, that was really outstanding. That you really did a nice job.